It is great to be back here at Colorado School of Mines again. I've had the pleasure of standing on stages such as this, standing behind podiums, sitting around tables and having hard conversations about what we need to do. And it's always great to be back here to talk about a little bit about what's going on in the industry. As Morgan said, my name is Alice Jackson. I'm the Senior Vice President of Systems Strategy and Chief Planning Officer for Xcel Energy. And you might sit there and go, what the heck does that mean? So in my talk a little bit today, I hope to give you a little bit of insight into what it is that my team is doing, what our responsibilities are, and the challenges that we face. But before I do that, I want to go back and I want to bring back a little bit of, okay, how are we looking at these systems? It's time for a little bit of an update. Last year I stood here and I talked about a lot of exciting things that were happening, particularly in Colorado. And those exciting things continue to happen, and we keep seeing progress. One of the things I want to leave you with today is so many times we open up the Wall Street Journal or the New York Times or other science magazines and we go, oh my gosh, this problem is just so big. What I want to leave you with is that we are solving this problem. One step at a time, one question at a time, one issue at a time. We are making progress on taking this apart and figuring out how do we need to put it together in order to achieve a zero carbon system. I think it's incredibly important to continue to have that hope because I see it on my own team of how the culture impacts the progress, how the culture impacts the questions and the challenges and the resiliency of being able to take on this issue time and time again. So today in these 15 minutes that I have with you, I'm going to talk to you about three main things. I'm going to start talking about infrastructure. Where are we? What are we considering? What is out there? But you probably hear a lot about infrastructure and what's going on. Secondly, I want to move into organizational structuring. Because organizational structuring, I have found over the past couple of years, and I'm hoping to find as we continue with it, is going to be foundational and fundamental in moving us out of what has been business as usual for an industry that has existed for over 100 years. Third, and finally, and probably one of the most important pieces that I want to share some information with you today and give you an update, is to how we have to ground ourselves in the culture of the organizations that we are leading. The people, fundamentally, are the most important investment we need to be making. That is where we are going to be able to solve the problems. That is where we are going to be able to stand back up when we are knocked back down. When we get things wrong, we have to focus on these people to really make sure that we are driving the cultural shifts inside of our organizations as we try and solve some of these biggest problems of our generation. So, let's start with infrastructure. For those of you less familiar with who Xcel Energy is, we're an investor-owned utility, vertically integrated. What does that mean? That means that we have all of the generation, the transmission, and the distribution components of the system, and responsibilities for operating those systems. We also have a gas business. We're the gas local distribution company for roughly 3 million customers. We are located in 8 states in the United States. Think of it from the upper borders of the US to the southern. So we start in the UP, we go through Wisconsin, over to Minnesota, North and South Dakota, Colorado, the Panhandle of Texas, and New Mexico, eastern and southeastern New Mexico. Pause for a moment and think about the geography that I just mentioned. First off, lots of urban areas as well as plenty of rural. Think about the politics. Lots on the far left, lots on the far right. So how do you figure out how you bring infrastructure together under those types of environments to serve these types of customers? Now, we were the first utility in 2018 to announce that we were going to move to a zero carbon system by 2050. That was a pretty bold move on our part because one of the things we said is, and we don't know how. What we did say is we're putting some boundaries and some barriers and some guardrails on how are we going to tackle this problem. Reliability was the first one. We're not going to degrade the reliability our customers enjoy today in the progress of getting to a zero carbon system. The other guardrail that we put in place was affordability. We cannot be the deciding factor of do I heat or cool my home or buy food for my family. We have to figure out how to do both of these things inside of those guardrails and deliver on a zero carbon system. So with that as our vision, that is our North Star, how do you start tackling this problem? Well, you start by looking with what you have. We all go back to the scientific method. I love the scientific method because I think it grounds us in how we approach problem solving, how we go back to figuring out what is it that we need to do and how do we tackle this? How do we take it apart and take this elephant that is bigger than any of us have had to tackle before and eat it one bite at a time? So when we go back and we look at the systems we have, the fact of the matter, our electrical systems across our jurisdictions average age 55 years old. 55. We've built that infrastructure over the past 100 years. And I would put out there a hypothesis for you that the electrical infrastructure, the delivery of energy, the harnessing of energy, putting it into wires, delivering it to people, is the greatest manufacturing outcome that humanity has ever figured out. It delivers on everything that we need to do. I find it a little humorous, and those of you that are engineers in the room are going to enjoy this one. A number of years back, a survey went out to people, and they said, what would you prefer? Your electricity to go out or your Wi-Fi? Guess what people said? They'd rather their electricity to be out. I've got news for you. As soon as that goes out, you have no Wi-Fi. So it's interesting how people's perceptions on this around that infrastructure, but it also tells you something about people. We have done such a great job of delivering this remarkable resource to customers that they don't think about it. And there's another piece of it, is they actually think it's easy. How many of you in this room believe generation to transmission to distribution to transformation is easy? I'm so glad not a single hand went up. This is complex stuff. So when you think of the systems of the infrastructure that we have in place, think of the questions that we have to solve. So my team inside of Xcel Energy is known as Integrated System Planning. The reason we pulled it together was exactly because of infrastructure and the questions we have outstanding. I will tell you, our world as a utility was simpler 20 years ago. It was simpler because what you had to do, plug and play the pieces of the puzzle, you built a generator, you harnessed the energy, you put it into the transmission system, you moved it through some substations to transform it to lower voltages until you got to the customer level that they wanted to use it at, and the customer used it. But then about 20 years ago, some things started happening. Technology evolved. Things came forward. Customers started putting rooftop solar on, having batteries in their homes, having demand controllers in their homes, changing the way that they were consuming energy. We thought our biggest problem up to that point in time was doing things like figuring out how to connect an electric arc furnace that went from 0 to 100 megawatts in 6 seconds. That was hard back in the day. Now we had people pushing things onto the system from the opposite direction. That changed the dynamic in which our systems were operating. The loadings of our load curves, what those feeders were looking like, the power that needed to move through, the integrity of it, how it was impacting volatility on the system. Those put more questions in. Then we had variable energy coming in from the generation side too, where it was easy before, relatively, to sit there and say, shovel more coal in, or open the valve and let some more gas flow, and you would automatically get the energy on the other side, and you knew what the equations were, the math and the science behind it. Now we had to contend with something like wind and solar. A utility industry, we are not compensated for variability and risk. Go back to what you all want from us. Reliability, number one, has never changed through time. Customers want to know we're going to receive the energy we need when we need it. We are not looked at as R&D. In fact, when I joined the industry on the utility side 15 years ago, I was told, why are you doing this? They're such dinosaurs. I will contend we are not dinosaurs. This industry, what we have built over all this time, is incredible. And what we are evolving to and figuring out and how to integrate is amazing. I'll give you a couple of numbers, and I'm going to move on to the second piece because the organizational structure is important. We recognized with the changes on our system that we were going to have to make some differences and answer questions differently. It was no longer sufficient enough to have a generation department, then a transmission department, then a distribution department, that occasionally they picked up the phone and called each other whenever they needed something, because now we have to solve the puzzle a little differently. Here's why. Colorado alone, we have a 7,100 megawatt peaking system. That means on the hottest day of the year when everybody's using their air conditioning and everything is going on, it's like usually the third day of the week after it's been hot. We had a lot of those this summer. That's when we hit 7,100 megawatts, where we have to deliver that to our customers across our systems. In the state of Colorado right now, we have over 4,000 megawatts of wind installed, and we're going to be at 6,000 megawatts of wind in the next few years. Think about the variability of that energy, how that put risk in the question in the model. The good news is when you face science, which is what physics is of delivering electricity, you start problem solving. So we called our friends. You're going to hear from Dr. Martin Keller after this. We called NREL, didn't we, Martin? And we called NCAR. We said, how do we solve this problem? How do we take the uncertainty and the variability out of this so that we can operate the system? You partner with others and you get to the science. You figure out how it comes together. That is why we have one of the smallest systems that doesn't have a lot of ability to pull in energy from other places with the highest volumes of renewables. In Colorado, once we implement the outcome of this most recent electric resource plan, we will be delivering roughly 85% of the energy our customers consume from renewable resources by the end of the year 2028. Not many people can say that. It is pretty incredible what you can do with science and what you can do with infrastructure. But we have not solved all the problems. So let's shift over to organizational change. We recognize, like I said, you can't have these silos that occasionally talk. Because what if there's a better solution? Not every system that is having transmission congestion needs more transmission. You could solve that transmission congestion issue with maybe a battery being installed, or building a new generator in a key location. And we've been looking at this for decades now. If you look down at ERCOT, where they have an energy-only market, you can see where the high prices are, which then drives generation to that area versus a transmission solution. But it may not be the best costing outcome. But how do you look at it? We've historically had modeling and tools that looked at these things individually and separately, and occasionally would say, oh, I just went over the amount of energy and capacity I have in a substation. I need to go call transmission because they need to build me a new one. We're revolutionizing that. We're trying to take the problems that we have and put them in the middle of the table, and then put around the table the generation, transmission, distribution, and even the gas solutions, and say, solve this problem holistically. Because it's not enough to just solve it in our silos. We're not there yet. In fact, I have a couple of employees in the audience that you can go and talk to later if you find them, and they'll tell you we are not there yet, but we're making incredible progress. And once again, we were one of the first utilities to change the methodology and the way that we're approaching this problem, because it's necessary. One of the things that we talk about in business, and if you've ever gone through some business courses, anybody who's been on the MBA side, is when you look at organizational structures, they matter. Because as humans, we build affinity, alliances, importance around the things that we are most responsible for and the people we are closely connected to. So if I'm sitting in the transmission team, and distribution's over there, they always have it slightly wrong, right? You got to put the teams together. You have to have the conversation together because these are big problems that we don't have a ton of time to solve. So bringing those organizations together to have the conversation, to do the solutioning together, will make us more efficient, will make us stronger, and will allow us to move forward quicker. We are starting to see this. We're starting to see the conversations around the table. And in my particular case, I'm seeing those in, I have a dreamer group. So the integrated planning team sits down and they go, okay, what are the problems that we are solving? What are the possible solutions? Early stages of the scientific method, you might say. What's the hypothesis? What's the data that I have? What's the reality that I'm living in? They then come up with this looks like it really would work. They also come up with the problems that we can't solve yet. And they send those out for others to go shopping on. Because once again, my company is not a research and development organization. That is not where people want us to be. So we've got to put those problems out there. Just like when we called NREL and NCAR and said, we need help. We have to put those problems out there so that universities, laboratories, and third parties can go and solve them. So we make that shopping list in this early stage, and we send it either to our corporate development team, or we come to Mines and we have a conversation. Or we go to other universities and have a dialogue. Then we move on and we go, okay, once we have kind of a rough idea of where things are, That goes to our conceptual design team. And they put the bones and a little bit of muscle and maybe some tendon around, okay, we're going to do a wind farm. We're going to do these 3 solar farms. We're going to do this battery storage. That's where the early design comes together. And then it becomes alive because you pick the land. You do the GIS study. You figure out what it's going to be. This is the process and the evolution that we are going through to figure out how do we close the gap. What we are doing is we're doing our best to make sure that we are no longer sitting in business as usual. Because here's the thing, and I'm going to shift into some of the cultural conversation here. Business as usual, for the past 30 to 40 years in the utility industry, has been an interesting animal. Post-Depression, in the 1930s to the 1960s, our industry very much was get power to the people, building the infrastructure. It was building out the distribution because there were communities that had no electricity. It was really building out that infrastructure. Into the 60s and 70s, we started seeing innovations, like air conditioning. And when air conditioning came along, it really increased the volume of energy and electricity people were needing in their homes and businesses. So during that time frame, everything was great, and we were building a lot. Very focused on the operations of the systems. How do you deliver? How do you do this amazing physical thing and put it in the ground? In the 1970s, some of you may recall this, but you were probably very young, we hit the energy crisis. There was the belief that natural gas was going to be going away. So we doubled down and invested in coal plants and nuclear at that point in time. So coming out of that tail end of the 1970s, maybe into the mid-1980s, we had a robustly built generation system, a robustly built transmission network, and the distribution was largely there. Yes, there were some pockets of like new neighborhoods and other growth coming in, but they were largely there. What came out of the energy crisis was the question, how do we use less energy? Energy efficiency, DSM. The growth stopped. And in some instances, reversed. So for the past 30 to 40 years, we have had 0 to no load growth on the systems that now I can mention 2 words, data centers, and all the other things that come before that, EVs, home heating, electrification, all those other kinds of things that are driving massive changes on the electrical infrastructure side, not just the generation and the system changing there. But just a moment. 30 to 40 years. How long is a typical career? A typical career in the industry is 30 to 40 years. So when you go back to the team that I have the pleasure of leading, these wonderful individuals, engineers and others, have any of them had to design a system proactively in a period of significant growth? The answer is no. So how does an individual that has been tasked with leading a team that is supposed to do integrated system planning, with a long-term future look of tremendous opportunity, then stand in front of a group of roughly 200 individuals and go, so, I need you to not do what you've done for the past 30 years of maintain and replace. Instead, change your focus and vision to growth, variability, system risk. How do you think that feels? It's a little scary, is what I would say. Because if you're at the tail end of your career and you've done this, you're just like, oh, do I really want to get on this train? If you're in your middle of your career, maybe you're like, oh, this is kind of exciting, and I really want to move into it, and this is going to be interesting. If you're at the beginning of your career, you might like, hi, I just took a couple of classes on battery storage at college, and you have more knowledge base than any of the people on my team. Yet we have all this generational conversation about how we relate, the things that are important to us at different ages. Throw that into the mix in the conversation, and you have an interesting cultural question on how do you approach the problem. This is the challenge that we face as an industry. This is the challenge I face as a leader. And figuring out how to have that conversation is a key part. I'll leave you with this. Where I have found the most success in working with teams in this highly dynamic and changing and very complex environment is focusing on the people. 9 months into creating this team, I was sitting there and going, why aren't we making more progress? I had all the excitement in the world to be able to help this move forward. But that doesn't translate necessarily to the team having that same excitement because there's, as you go down the chain, there's lack of role clarity. How do things get done? What does this look like? What I found more than anything was I needed to pull more people together to have a conversation. We've had more progress in light bulbs going off, no pun intended, and being able to make progress going forward in sitting around a table, whether that's in my backyard over ribs with beer, or around a table at the office, or over Zoom or over Teams whenever we've needed to have a conversation. But the biggest piece of leadership in this is making sure you're focusing on the people. Have the conversation, answer their questions, hear their fears, feel what they feel, and then you can get to solutions. We have a remarkable opportunity to change the way that energy is not only consumed by people around the world, but to do it in a way that offers us the outcomes of prosperity and health. That is what we are tackling as our challenge. That is what I'm excited every single day to get up and do. And I am more than thrilled to work with every single person that I have on my team in order to help them see the path forward, solve the problems, and find a solution that's going to make a difference. Thank you for hearing my story today. I appreciate you taking that time, as well as congratulations. You're all on the journey with us.